Okay, I believe we're ready to begin.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is the Sweetwater Union High School District Audit and Finance Subcommittee meeting, November 3rd, 2021. And we are beginning. I'm just going to call the roll so we don't have to go through anybody, but we have here Dr. Aguirre, our superintendent, Dr. Jenny Sakeld, the chief financial officer. We have board president Nicholas Segura. Myself, I'm Paula Hall. I'm a board member and the chair of the Audit Finance Subcommittee. We have Lisa Schmidt, who is also on the Finance Subcommittee. Welcome, Lisa. Nice to see you. Ms. Janaea Quirk, the director of Planning and Construction. Do I have that right? Is that the full scope of your?
It's facilities and operations, Trustee Hall.
Facilities and operations. I knew it was more than what I had said. Yes, facilities and operations, because that is only a piece of what you do. And Athena Quarles, you're here as well. You are over the finance. You're the manager. Can you repeat your title for me, please?
Oh, you're on mute.
Debt Finance Manager. Thank you, Mrs. Hall.
Thank you. And is there anyone else with us? Carolina Zimmerman is also on the call, right? Because she's the executive administrator supporting Jenny Salkeld. So thank you, and this committee
And
as well.
Trustee Hall, if I could say, we do have a few other folks on this meeting. We have Nancy Piccone, our Director of Fiscal Services. We also have Vanessa Garcia, our payroll manager. We have our internal auditors, Daphne Enriquez and Gerardo Moreno. And we also have our external audit team from Crow. We have Elizabeth Sav and Garen McKay.
Thank you very much for completing that introductions. So we'll begin.
Oh, we have, I'm sorry, Trustee Hall, I want to miss one more person. We have our purchasing manager, Dawn Prince, on as well.
Oh, and several of these people I haven't met before. So, I mean, I have probably, but I don't think I've met your purchasing manager yet. So that would be great to see him tonight. Thank you.
And I don't want to miss, I see that we've got Miss Macedo also, Deanne Macedo's on.
Okay, yes. Thank you. All right, so let's get started. First, we have the audit updates from Crow. You want to go ahead? Sure. Dr. Sakeld, and make the introductions.
Thank you, Trustee Hall and committee members. So we do have Elizabeth Sav and Garen McKay here from Crow. They're going to be providing an update as to where we're at with our district-wide financials, as well as our bond financials and bond performance audits, the work that they're doing. We anticipate bringing that forward to the committee in early December, and then to our board on December 13th. So I will at this point hand over to Ms. Sav, and she can provide an update.
Great.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to let you know Kevin Smith, the signing partner on the engagement, you're used to seeing his face and hearing his voice. He had a delayed flight, which he is currently trying to race through the airport. So he was hoping to pop on, but is having me lead the conversation here. So please accept his apology. He was absolutely intending on being here and being present. So thank you for letting us give you an update. And yes, like Dr. Sakeld mentioned, we are planning to present to you our draft financials and draft bond reports at the beginning of December. So just by saying that out loud, we have definitely made lots of leaps and bounds and progress in working with your management team. They have done a phenomenal job, just really trying to step up from the long timeline we had from the past 2 years to now getting everything right on track, and actually early in the timeline, considering that CDE did allow again this year for an extension of district deadline to January 31, but we are absolutely pushing forward to have Sweetwater's reports done in time for the traditional 12/15 deadline. As far as a status report for the bond side of the audits, I do not lead that because it's very important. I know for the committee to have two separate managers. Our current manager assigned to that is unable to be on here today, but I will just provide the update that majority of the procedures have been performed. We have some follow-up completion items. At this point, we are currently moving through the final procedures, and we'll have those final reports to present to the CBOC in a couple of weeks. So we're just wrapping up the final things and working through the final reports to present those in a couple of weeks. For the district audit, I am the lead on that. Garen McKay here is my partner in crime for getting through that audit. And we are right on track. We are currently actually actively working back and forth with your management team. We have completed the internal control assessments. We've completed the compliance testing, and we are working through the final pieces of substantive testing and working through the reporting right now. So as you know, it's an extensive report, and that's the last portion of our audit. So we're getting ready to put all of that together, provide it to your management team for them to do their review, make sure we are all on board with the different balances and that everyone agrees with the disclosures. And that's really where we are at this point. No specific details to provide, but in December's meeting, we will have all the details to work through as we've finalized all of our review process. Any questions that we can answer?
Well, yes, let me go to Dr. Sockeld first. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Sockeld, about the progress of the audits, the external audits to
I
this
think
time?
Ms. Sav has highlighted it, and in just echoing her points, I mean, the team collectively in working with Crow, we've pulled a lot of information, samples, as she mentioned earlier on, compared to the last prior audits. We're back to now with the traditional process, which we're very excited about, but the team has worked very collaboratively with them. And this month we'll spend time looking at reviewing those draft reports and working on the management discussion and analysis. So we're very pleased at the progress and where we're at in our work.
Thank you. And are there any questions from the committee?
I would just like to add, I appreciate the work put into this, and I'm really glad to hear that we're getting back to a normal process for the team. And I truly appreciate the amount of work you've done over the years, not just this year or but the year before and prior year. I know it's been a lot of work for everybody, and I just truly appreciate that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schmidt, no comment, no question at this point.
No, just echoing other comments, and I've been reading through all the materials ahead of this meeting and just very impressed with the thoroughness of all the information provided, so thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I really want to also echo the comments from the committee and from my board president that we are very glad to see that we are coming into a normal status of operation with the audit and the timeframes. I mean, I know you could have extended it, but I really think it shows how much work has gone in to be really on a regular schedule, and to have this come to us in December is huge. It's been a huge effort, and I really appreciate how much you've been available to our team and to this board and the committee over the last 3 years or 2 years with all the with all the work. I mean, it seems like
feels like more, right?
it does. I mean, there just seems to have been a tremendous amount of time that you've been working, and the diligence to get it all done is great. And I would like to know, it sounds like things have gone pretty smoothly, and you have not found any real issue at this point with any of the information that you've been provided to date. And is that your sense with the other, the bond audits as well? The
Yeah,
performance
so
audit?
yeah, so a couple of things there, and just although we are getting much better on the timeline here, I do want to make sure that everyone is clear that that doesn't mean just because the two really messy years, I guess, of lack of a better term, where we were just really testing the heck out of everything. We have not audits, we go based off of a materiality threshold for all of our fund testing. We have not increased that. We have kept our materiality thresholds low. That means our sample selections and our risk assessments are high. So just so that you know, we have not really let off the gas in that perspective. We have maintained that. As far as findings go, we're not really prepared to discuss anything in particular, except for the fact that I know that the committee is aware, of the, for lack of a better word, kind of systemic issues we were having, which were all, stemming from true course and the GL system. So we do anticipate some quote unquote findings in relation to that, just because that system is still in place. But so far at this point, we are definitely seeing improvements, and we are not seeing the issues that we were seeing before. So I'm encouraged by that, but I can't really speak specifically to our final findings.
Yes, I wouldn't expect that until the report's out. Thank you. And could you give me the name of the lead auditor for the Propo performance audit?
Oh, so the manager that we had before was Tim Canup, and he has just recently gone onto a leave of absence. So
Okay.
we have replaced him, and we plan to introduce that individual to the beginning of December's meeting, who also has extensive bond performance audit experience. So I think you'll be pleased with that selection.
And so you can't share his name with us?
Oh, yes. I need to check with Kevin and double check because there was
Okay,
two
no
individuals and I'm not sure who he decided with. So I need to ask him, and he's not on right now. So there's one of two guys, and I'll introduce. It's not Garen. I wasn't
Okay,
willing
no
to give
worries.
Garen up.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll wait for that information, but I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the effort that your director was taking to try and be here in person. And unfortunately, a lot of airlines are being canceled recently because of weather and other delays. So I totally understand the challenges in that respect. And we appreciate your time. If there's no other questions for the committee, well, is there anything else on the ongoing? And Dr. Saka, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, so Trustee Hall, yes, so that's a separate item. So I think from Crow's standpoint, if they're complete with their presentation, then we can move on to that. So I think they're probably free to go.
Okay. Go work on the audit.
Right. Yes.
All right, bye.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you all. Good to see you.
Yes, so then the next item,
Thank you,
Trustee Hall, is the other ongoing and completed external audits and reviews. So aside from the one we're presented now, so Carolina will pull that document up. And as you can see here, how we have this noted is either from like a program standpoint or from a fiscal or external standpoint. So the program, what we brought forward on this item, at the last meeting, there was an update from our state and federal office on the federal program review. At that time, one item was pending related to the adult ed program and a specific finding at the time. And so what we've included is in your documentation that particular response that addresses it and notes the corrective action plan and was accepted by the CDE. So this review is now complete. So we wanted to make sure that you had that information. Then the next item or the next items on the list, we did engage a few months ago. Back in May, we received a letter from CalPERS, which is our one of the public retirement systems for employees, for typically more for classified employees. And they commenced their work working very closely with our payroll department and our human resources department in June. And so in the scope of their work was to look at pay schedules and pay rates. And they sampled, it wasn't just Sweetwater. It was several other school districts within the state, and particularly here locally. And so they're putting together, it's going to be a report that aggregates all of their work from those different school districts. So at this point, we've noted it as pending. We anticipate that they will have their report in the upcoming weeks, but they have not been definite in terms of the dates. So our payroll manager has reached out periodically to kind of check in on status. But at this point, we've provided the engagement letter for your reference as well, attached to the schedule. And so it's a typical review every probably 3 to 5 years. CalPERS will reach out to school districts to look at different areas. And so this is not unusual.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the next item is still ongoing. I think we reported it out the last meeting. It's the County of San Diego Health and Human Services. Again, as an agency, they typically will hold these type of reviews or audits to look at invoices that have been submitted. So they look at, payroll detail and things like that. So at this point, we've provided them the information and we're awaiting a response. So we've listed it as ongoing and open. Okay. And then the next item we have listed here kind of ties back to what Elizabeth Sav mentioned from the external audit standpoint, relates to our AB 139 external or extraordinary audit performed by FCMAT. Why we list it as ongoing is because still a lot of our work is associated with the computer implementation, shifting that from our current system of TrueCourse to Infor. So that item, once we transition, will address a lot of the concerns from the external audit standpoint and what was also highlighted by FCMAT. So those are one of the key items in that regard, and why we're listing it as ongoing. And again, when we provide updates, we provided over the summer an update to the board and to this committee. So as things progress or things get addressed, we will definitely bring that back to this committee. And I think then again, just to kind of recap the table, we just also note what was just presented by the Crow team with their respective audits. So that's what we have here, unless there's any questions.
Yes, I would ask a question, if you don't mind, and then I'll ask if any of the other members have a question. My question, the letter that was included in the memo from Ms. Delgado, the screenshot, I think
Right.
it was, of the notification, it's really unclear what was, because it was cut off in that. It says finding has, and that's where it ends. So I can see it's a tool, but it doesn't show us really the whole message that was sent. I just wonder if there was a possibility you could send out or if that disappeared when she closed out her screen. So if there's any way you could get us a full screenshot, I'd appreciate it. If not, I understand that you're putting it through this way as a matter of the item being fully closed, the invoice and the payment back to on the finding has been received and duly noted, or is it just that? Because you can see that it's cut off. I can't really read what it said, so
We'll check with Ms. Delgado because I think that there was a response here that they said this was the official notification of that particular item.
I see the word complete at the top of the screen print, but I don't really see the whole message, so it's unfortunate we can't see that documented. But yeah.
We can double check, see if she's got a clearer copy, and then we can send it to the committee members, and we can
that'd be great.
We can work with Ms. Vicedo if that's something we can update to the board, to the agenda item.
All right, thank you. That'd be, and the other question I had on this was the letter from the County of San Diego addressed, and this is July of 2021, so that's just this past July, and I'm wondering if we will be in contact with them to update the contact information on the head, who is heading up the program now, since there's been a change in personnel here at our district.
And I have, when we received this notification, I did inform the representative at the time that Dr. Moore was overseeing that area. So once we get a draft of the report, we'll double check too to make sure that they've updated the contact information.
All right, great. Are there any questions from the committee on any of these items?
Trustee Hall, you asked the question I was going to ask, and it's been clarified about the letter.
Okay.
That we had, that the item was cleared, so that's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
And actually, Dr. Folter's name on the document, and if that could be updated too. So
Yeah.
I've got both of them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the records they had when they submitted this, so we've informed them. We'll ensure that once it's complete, that it continues with the latest update.
Yes, it's usually in their like document addresses, so it's just a system generated thing that they need to update. Yeah, thank you. All right, so is there any questions, Ms. Schmidt? Do you have anything?
I think it was more of a general question. I'm learning about the different audits on the checklist. Does it just vary from audit, like the time frame in which these are completed? Just so I have an idea of, ones that are pending and when they're received. It seems like some of these, the turnaround is quicker.
Yes,
so
very
case by case basis.
Right, some of them are case by case, and some of them could be standard annual type of reviews or audits, or others may be periodic, such as the CalPERS, that every 3 or 5 years or so. So, and it may depend on, we've provided them information, and then it's the turnaround back. So there is some variability with these. They're not as like with our district-wide financial audit, like we've met with Crow. Again, that's statutory. So we've got, certain specific dates and things like that we follow. The federal program monitoring, as an example, though, they do conduct their work every other year. So typically around the spring, they're here every to do their work, and we'll start, even earlier than that. So this one's a little bit more of kind of a standing item for at least the federal program review.
But the federal program monitoring doesn't come every other year per se. It's sometimes 4 years. It depends on the selection of districts that they choose to monitor, and whether or not districts have findings from a prior monitoring visit, I believe.
Yeah, I was gonna say for Sweetwater, they've been here every other year, at least from how I understand it, that they've been addressing and reviewing the federal dollars, and particularly this past year with the CARES Act funds as well. But again, I can get further information from Ms. Delgado as well.
Well, that's fine. You don't need to do that. It just, in general, I don't think federal program monitoring is scheduled necessarily at the same districts every year, although larger districts do tend to get visited more than smaller districts. And my question, did that help, Lisa?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. And I think the other thing, I forgot what I was going to ask, so never mind. The calendar we have kind of tells you what the statutory timeframes are for us, just like with the external audits. Those are every year, and normally without COVID's extension on it, those audits are due, and we take them to the board every December. The external audit for the prior year, which would have ended to June 30th, would come the following December, that December, for the board to approve before it's submitted to the county and the state for it being accepted. And that's where we have changed. I think the Propo performance audit is usually, I think they have a deadline, really. It's more like March. but we changed that so that would come to the board along with the financial audits in December. So that's how we've contracted with the external auditors so that those timeframes can be met annually. So is there anything else on this that we need?
No, that was our update, Trustee Hall.
Okay. All right, go ahead to the next item, please.
Okay.
Financial reports.
The next item, again, an update. I know with the board members, we presented this back in September, but as our practice is, we provide certain highlights from our statutory reports. So for Ms. Schmidt, what we've provided here, and if maybe I'll have Carolina go to one of the slides, maybe start with slide 5. This is a report where we look at how we closed the books for the year, what we call the unaudited actuals. It was the data before we handed it to our CRO team to review the financials and provide their feedback there. What we typically do when we present this over the last few years, I've been sharing with the board kind of that historical perspective. And you can certainly see when looking at the bottom line for some of these years, particularly in column C and column D, where we did have the negative fund balance. But then when you see those subsequent years, 2019-20 and then 2021, how we've helped turn things around in a much better financial position from those particular years. But again, it gives that historical context of how we ended the year. And then on the next slide, what it does is now, yeah, Caroline, if you can go to, yeah, that one. This is part of, it's consistently how we share this also with our interims. Each reporting cycle that we bring forward to the board, just kind of that side-by-side comparison, because our budget, we do bring that adopted budget in June every year, but it's a living document throughout the year when we get new assumptions, new updates from the state. And so we just like to have that comparative. And so looking at the last 2 columns, estimated actuals when we come in June with the adopted budget, we have we project out how we're going to close the books based on the information we have. And so we anticipated $49 million fund balance. After we've gone through our process of our accruals, the encumbrance adjustments with, obligations, things like that, things came in a little bit more favorable on the expenditure side of things. So we ended the year with $71 million. Okay, so that's what our basis is for the fund balance. And then the next page now highlights where we're at with estimated actuals and where our unaudited actuals. So it's a little bit more line by line, side by side. So you can see from the revenues, it was only in the budget this large of $4 million, we're only, again, more favorable by 1.5 million, but you can see a lot of the areas of where numbers came in a little bit less than what we anticipated, was about almost $17 million. So all in all, that helped contribute to that bottom line. And also our contributions to some of our other programs, to our restricted programs, also came in a little bit lower. And a lot of it was attributed to the closures. I mean, we resumed school back to in-person and around the April timeframe. So a lot of it was attributed to that in areas of supplies, some of our contracted services, and then some areas with, less of substitute or extra duty salary costs. And so that was a net impact of about 22 million. Okay. And then with that, we highlighted how those dollars were going to be set aside. In June, our board also takes action on resolutions regarding some of those set-asides. So you can see our economic uncertainties of that $71 million, how then it gets broken out. We had $9.3 million for that 2% it's required by the state to maintain. And then you see we have a line item for contingencies that was about another 3%, and then a portion there for declining enrollment. And then I'll highlight that when we get to the next slide, how key that's going to be with our out years specifically. And then all the other ones are kind of, in a sense, not spendable to, like, such as our contractual stipends. We have that $650,000 with one of our agreements with our teachers, revolving cash, our inventory prepaid, school site carryovers, those are, committed. And then the SERP payoff, specifically that $7 million, that was to get ahead of in essence, paying that obligation off with these one-time savings. We can pay that off a little bit earlier. We're actually bringing something forward to the board next week, so that can be executed in advance by 2 years. And then the last item, the $5 million, that was an obligation that was set aside for a debt that matured in September. So as of June 30th, we had to have that fund balance earmarked for that. And so that obligation was paid on June 30th. So now when we come forward to first interim, that $5 million will not be reflected in the reserve because that's been met. And then with that, so if we go to the next slide, we typically don't do this for unaudited actuals because you're just closing out the year. But what we did in this scenario to highlight to the board was that, again, that beginning fund balance. If you recall, we thought it was going to be 49 million when we were looking at it in June. We took that 3-year requirement of a budget standpoint and just changed where it's in red by dropping in that revised beginning balance. What it did to it improved the declining enrollment a bit, but what it did is also it shored up those 2 out years, because when we brought forward to the board in June, we didn't have an economic uncertainty for the 23-24 year. So that extra amount helped us fulfill, at least kind of in the projection standpoint, meet our obligations in that 3-year view. So this is what we did to highlight that aspect of that change with unaudited actuals. And if things remain as such, now that we're doing the work for first interim, there is a strong likelihood that we could present a positive certification as we review that work with the county office as well in that work. So this was kind of to provide that view. Whereas in June, we didn't have that 3rd year. The county was requesting a plan at the time of how we were going to solve for that, and then how we met that. And I think in our package too, we provided a copy of the County Office of Ed response unaudited actuals that said, based on this information, it appears that I think, Carolina, we've got that in there too, right? It was the last slide, that we wouldn't need to bring forward a plan to solve for those years. And those are the key items and key slides that I wanted to highlight, because each statutory reporting period, the county reviews and provides their feedback. And so in here's where they said it's no longer, they said at the time that we did budget adoption, they had noted that that was going to be required. And now based on this information, that a plan may no longer be required, assuming that those numbers stay pretty static or close. So again, it's just a report to the committee based on what we presented on the 13th of September.
Yeah, and Dr. Sokol, I just wanted to highlight again and re-emphasize the point that you indicated in this letter, which is that 3rd paragraph, which indicates kind of the 2nd sentence, based on the ending balance for fiscal year 2021, a plan may no longer be required. So that continues our efforts to, again, that whole fiscal recovery, that path that we have been down. I think that's an indicator that the county is beginning to acknowledge that path and the work that we've done to rehabilitate and recover our fiscal standing. So that, I think that sentence in itself is an indicator of that recovery that we've been so focused on. So I just wanted to highlight that because it goes to the good work happening over in Dr. Sokol's area under her leadership. So I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any of our team members, our committee? Dr. Sokol, I know you met with Ms. Schmidt before she, formally our last meeting, when she formally joined our committee. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if you did explain about the difference between, say, the interims, which we're reporting where we're projecting expenditures during the year, and the actual estimated actuals, you know, because those are different time frames and different reporting, it's a different lens that we're using, right? That your team is using to report and to make those projected. So do you want to kind of reiterate maybe some of those differences so that we have an understanding? And then also I would ask, the items in red on this page, and it's the one page that you have about the impacts. The last page you were showing.
Right, was slide 9.
Right.
Yeah. So
I don't
Caroline, maybe
see
you can
it.
go to slide, Caroline, if you can go back to slide 9, please.
I don't have page numbers on mine,
Yeah,
so I
it's
don't
a-
know
yeah,
what.
yeah.
But yeah, I
This
think the last column, the numbers in red are not actually negative numbers, otherwise they'd be bracketed, correct?
Right, exactly.
So
It was
they're
just to
not
call out the
reducing
change.
it just so that you can see them, because as a, you know, analyst, I'm used to seeing red means, you know, it's reducing whatever you're showing. So I appreciate that.
In this case, it's not, the numbers are not in the red per se. No, they're fine. It's just a matter of, it's just to highlight the changes, correct? Yes, bracketed
Okay.
would be a negative. Kind of what you see then in that row, I think it's 8, where you see the 22-23 year, those in brackets are deficit spend. That's why, and to highlight, I didn't mention that earlier, is going back to that declining enrollment, because we do have that impact in 22-23. You see on the revenue line, there's a steep decline, right? We go from 418, it's almost like a $19 million difference, to 399. That's because of our decline in enrollment and what the state has put in place via the governor's order of the hold harmless, where revenues were staying static for 2 years. That goes away for next year. So that's what's correlating to those revenue, or to the reserves being set aside in 21-22 to help offset that difference.
Okay. I think my other question would be about the changes in your estimated your expenditures for the out years. It being that you're reducing it from 22-23 to 23-24. And is that a solution that you've already been working on, or is that just something you're assuming as to attrition, or what is causing that reduction in the expense?
So on that one line item, that rolls up all the different line items. It could be a change in contract services, because you can see with contributions, those are going up. But for the expenditures, it could have been that there was a change in those line items, not necessarily from the staff, because we don't have that accounted for of changes with staffing per se on those out years at this point.
So at this point, you are counting all the staff as being, we're not reducing staff at that point.
Not at,
That's not, and
not in these
and
assumptions right now, no.
so it would have to be in hard costs that we were looking at that reduction.
Correct. Right.
And could it have been anything to do with the CERP payoff, perhaps?
That is a component of it. So yes, so that
Okay.
about our CERP is about 3.8. So that's a line item in that what would have been a fixed cost in our out years, correct? Because we're paying that off in 21-22. So
And the QZAB as well?
The QZAB, no, because the QZAB was just one time that we wouldn't.
Okay,
have
so
factored that
it
out.
wouldn't have been in there originally, because it would have already been going out in this
Correct.
fiscal year.
Yeah, and again, when you're looking year to year, when we do our multi-year
Right.
assumptions, 5 million
Right.
wasn't there to begin with.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Is the expenditures less for the salaries just due to less employees?
Not in those out years right now. Right now, we're assuming we do our MYP, our multi-year projections. We assume the current staff and then continue with that until if there are any changes assumed to that. So that line item is inclusive of other fixed costs, contracts, things like that.
Oh, it wasn't, sorry, it was on the first slide.
Oh, on your revenue? Yes, in terms
Yeah.
of that, yes. So from revenues, that is reflective of the decline of student enrollment.
Yeah, and Dr. Sawkill, for context, can you share what is anticipated in terms of lost revenue based on the declining enrollment?
So for that year, if maybe Caroline, you can go back again to that other slide. we're looking at about 18 to almost $19 million. Again, when we were doing this work back with budget development in June, and again, we're going to be evaluating that again with first interim because we have updated assumptions. But key factors that go into that state calculator is our student enrollment, our average daily attendance, and our unduplicated percentage of students. Those that are on free and reduced meals, are homeless and foster youth, and English learners. And so what the state held us to, when they, every March, what we call the P2 period, is what the state takes as our enrollment number. And then because we are a district in declining enrollment, that number is what factors into the subsequent year revenue. And so what happened with the pandemic is the state locked in that March of 2020 and then maintained that number for us. So we're at a much higher enrollment number than where we're at today. So that's helping us, it kind of smooth things out, kept it stable for us. But that provision goes away. So it's the fact that we've had now year over year decline in enrollment, particularly last year. I think the decline was about 1,700 or 1,400. It went down considerably. So that catches up to us in 22-23.
That's when it sunsets.
Yeah, we had, if we kind of look historically, we had in 2015-16 about 40,000 students. This year, going into our first interim, we're about 36,500, 36,600. So, you know, you're looking at a significant decline and loss in revenue just over the course of the last few years, and then most recently with how this works with that state provision.
Yeah, and that's happening across the state of California and really across the country in terms of the declining enrollment. Really, it's been really pronounced here in the state of California. You know, it's for different reasons, like it's expensive to live in California. And just with the pandemic, a lot of people moved out of state. So there's a lot of reasons behind that, but it is a trend that's across the state. It's not necessarily unique to our district.
But the state supplements that.
For the time, yeah, the
For the
time
time
being, yeah, but that shock absorber goes away after
Right.
this year.
That's a good way to say it, shock absorber, yeah.
Right. Shock absorber, yes.
CARES Act money or any of that hasn't gone toward this.
No, that's separate and apart from, correct.
Right. When it's the unrestricted dollars, you're really talking about state funds for the most part, correct? And the other thing to remember, and I have to keep reminding myself, we budget based on enrollment. That's how we project. So what we're projecting in enrollment is how we build a budget. But the revenue comes in based on average daily attendance. So you could fall under what your projected revenue would be that you put in your budget if your attendance is not where it should be. And that can catch you in a quandary if you're not really following some safeguards or thinking critically about it and watching it. And what we're trying to do as a board, I believe, is really I know the superintendent and his team are looking at ways to really address how to bring back those students that are chronically absent and the ones that may be challenged right now because of different reasons, maybe the whole thing with different isolations for COVID reasons or other, needs of the family. Some of those things are impacting perhaps our ADA, and we really have to be mindful of that and keep an eye on it and really plan how to address that long term.
So those projections are very challenging.
You got it.
And
There's a lot of variables, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the structural. Some pieces are structural, and some pieces are we have the ability to adjust, kind of moving forward. So there's a lot of moving parts to a school district budget, and I think that's the complicated part about it. There's not an easy way to communicate it, just because there's different layers. There's general fund and restricted. There's restricted. There's different sets of funds. So as we try to communicate it, that is part of the challenge. Is there's just the complexity of it.
Along with an unprecedented pandemic.
Correct.
Oh, there's that. Yes. Yes.
And a 3-year view in K-12 or just in education in general is difficult because you have your best assumptions from the current year, but even those are moving. But when you look at the 2 out years, I mean, we rely on the state, School Services California, Department of Finance, but those are best guesses that they provide us as well, right? I mean, that's why things move and as we get new information.
Right. The Legislative Analyst Office has a lot of good analysis and they provide a lot of insight and reporting. And then you have different university, different think tanks that provide some insight, and they, Dr. Aguirre and Dr. Sockeld and their team will be looking at all of that throughout the year and adjusting accordingly. And it's like every district needs to have not just one plan, they have to multiple plan because, it could come out at the end of the year and you won't know until June what you really will what will impact your final budget adoption. So it's really looking at it throughout the year, making some different plans. So in case one thing doesn't come about, like one year, we didn't have a COLA. Last year, we didn't have, right? And this year, not only did they fund us the COLA for last year, but they gave a super COLA, right? So they impacted a higher COLA than what we expected, which was very much a great thing. But at the same time, it's not going to be, next year it could go back to zero for, it may not be looking that way now, but there are always surprises around the corner, depending on what happens in Sacramento.
Yeah, to your point, Trustee Hall, if Carolina, you can go to the prior slide because this is how you can see things change so much for us in the prior year and as a result of the pandemic. Maybe one more, the slide 6, I think. I think to your exact point, Trustee Hall, the things at the state. So here, if you see column A, when we built the budget over a year ago, we were negative $28 million because these were the assumptions at the state. But then things changed so much within once the governor signed the budget, that's when we did the 45-day, then we got to a positive 13 million. So again, we're so dependent on what's provided from the state level and how it impacts our budget. That was a significant swing from that starting point for us when we were building the budget. And so you can see how we started the year as negative and then how we're ending the year. And again, all dependent on those assumptions. Okay.
Thank you. Really good work, Dr. Sockeld, for you and your team. I want you to know that we do recognize that in spite of all those variables and changes and a pandemic, they were doing great work and we appreciate it.
It's definitely been a collective effort by the team and the collective team. So yeah, kudos to them.
All right, so is there any further questions on that item? If not, we can move on to the next item, which is our internal audit.
Hello, good evening. This is Gerardo. So in regards to the first item for let's see, that was presented at the last subcommittee meeting. It was used as a reference. So do you guys have any questions in regards to that item?
I guess the only question we would ask is, well, unless another person has a question, but I would just ask, are you finding any particular difficulty in accomplishing the items or getting them completed as you move through the year?
Well, it is a 2-year plan, so we are working on some of those items right now. We're currently completing some of the school's items like for ASBs. But it is a 2-year plan, so we're currently working on that.
So are there particular challenges that you face in working the plan, whether it be a 2-year plan or a 1-year? Are there any? It's just a natural question you would ask an auditor, right?
Right.
What are some of the challenges that you face, and are they things that could be adjusted so that we can make it smoother in how you're able to complete your work? Or is there something that really is not out of the control of anyone that impacts how that is accomplished?
Hey, Trustee Hall, this is Daphne Enriquez, and I'll answer to that. From time to time, we do experience challenges with some of the items. Generally, it's with requesting information from the sites, but we do communicate or escalate these difficulties with management, who are able to assist with obtaining what is needed. But otherwise, at this time of the year, we usually focus at least the first quarter on working with ASBs, such as with finalizing their year-end financials. There's packets for those, and working with them for their spend down plans, which we'll be presenting later as one of the items.
So should I ask that question? So you're finding some challenges when you're to get responses? Is that what you're saying from the school sites?
Occasionally, yes, occasionally that can be one of our most common challenges, as for example, with receiving corrective action plans in response to the ASB internal audit reports that are issued. We ask for those sites to provide those to us within 30 calendar days of the date, or from the date that the report is issued. And there is often frequent follow-ups before we receive those corrective action plans. But again, we communicate these difficulties or include management on those communications so that we get them as timely as possible.
Okay. I think it is challenging if the message isn't supported by kind of a formalization of the plan, that it is required and how that's required. So whatever the board can do to support that, I think is key, whether it's in the policies. If you have any suggestions when you maybe in modifying a board policy, or in how the superintendent, I'm sure you meet with him probably on a regular basis, or as needed, you're communicating with him. But I think whatever we can do to make sure that it is seen as an important and vital task of the schools to submit things to the internal auditor. I think whatever we can do to support that is important, and we'd surely support you in that. So please let us know.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll let you know.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that if we need to do some kind of formal recommendation to ask for that to be done, I will do it in my report to the board, so that we can at least look at it. I know that it's been a difficult year, but it seems like I've seen this before. We've had this issue before, and I just want to make sure we get the message out that it is important to respond, and it's done in a way that is a formal document, so that you have the information and the records that you need to perform your work. Okay. Any questions on the items in this section? Do you want to continue with your presentation? Oh, did you, Lisa?
Oh, I could wait till after the presentation. Well,
Okay.
It was just more of a question. There were so many ASB audits. So given that I'm new, I was just wondering if that's customary for, but I could wait till after.
Oh, we can respond to that now, actually. So the ASBs those audits are considered routine. So we do try to perform those on an annual basis.
If I could ask, Chairwoman Hall.
Go ahead.
If we could, when we're going through an item, I didn't get a printout of this. I didn't print out everything, but I read through it. But while we're talking about this, can we possibly scroll through the pages as we discuss this? That'd be helpful.
Okay. Sure. All
Okay,
right, go ahead.
yeah, so we're still, so do you guys have any questions in regards to specifically the internal audit work plan?
I do not.
Okay. Okay, so do we move forward to the ongoing and completed internal audit? Is that fine? Okay, so the section B of the ongoing and complete internal audits, you will have copies of the reports that have been submitted. I believe the majority of these are ASBs. I believe there's actually, I think all of them are. If you guys have any questions in regards to any of the ones that we've completed, some of them have been by Daphne and the other ones have been by myself. Some of the school sites that were issued were to Castle Park High School, to Hilltop Middle, I believe Mar Vista, believe Mar Vista High School.
I have a
Granger?
question about
Uh-huh.
the first page on your ongoing and completed,
Okay.
where it says pending for current year, however, procedures for 1920 are in progress. Can you explain that a little bit for me? Item 3,
Item 3, let's see.
time and effort. District time and effort reporting. The item is pending and it says pending for current year. However, procedures for fiscal year 1920 are in progress. And the prior
Yes,
audit was delayed with fiscal services.
Yes, hi, Trustee Hall. So that was an audit that we began last year that we were unable to complete, but we're working with fiscal services currently to finalize that audit before we begin on the audit for the current year being for 21-22. So it's basically in progress.
And if I could add to Trustee Hall, and then maybe Daphne and Gerardo to clarify. So it's not just with fiscal services. This is work that's related with time accounting with adult ed as well, state and federal office, and various other programs. So it's not just with fiscal services. So I'd like to just clarify that.
Right, but
Right. Yeah.
but
We're helping
think,
facilitate that. We're helping facilitate that with them, but I think a lot of the information there with that work does have a lot of departments because of the federal programs impact so many areas.
right, and I understand how important those reports, the time and effort is really important. It should be for every program monitoring, especially federal program monitoring, those are to illustrate that the work being done is and being paid for with federal dollars is really key for that. And so it does give me a little bit of concern when we're so far, it seems like we're far behind. I don't know if we are or not, but if we are a year behind in that, it is concerning because already those kinds of reports come in. Typically, they can come in a semester or two after the fact. So sometimes with a change of staffing, retirement, whatever, those things can be delayed even longer. So I think it's key that we keep our eye on that and get an update on where we're at with that work. And if it's as you do that work, Gerardo and Daphne, I would ask that you keep an eye on if it's just across the district, then it's generally not a big issue. I mean, it is an issue, but it's not one particular or two sites so if it was one or two sites that seem not to be able to provide the information in a timely way, then maybe we could ask Dr. Sockfield and Dr. Aguirre to address that issue. But I really think we need to make sure that we get those things on track. They're important. And they can be a costly item if in fact they go back in a monitoring or in some kind of audit review, just like what we're seeing with the after school programs or the Medicare things. If things aren't in place, it can cost you down the road because you didn't have it. And the Medicare or the health ones, the ones that are connected to health services and specialized services, they tend to be those audits tend to come in 3 or 4 years after the fact. So I think some of that really has to be kind of cured up if that's possible.
Okay.
You can go ahead. I'm done.
Okay. So just for clarity, are we still in the ongoing and completed document, or are we now on the section A or section B?
We're still on section B. Did you want to move on to the combined reports?
Yes. Yeah, so if you guys had the opportunity to review some of those documents, do you guys have any questions in regards to the reports? I know Ms. Schmidt, you said you had a question.
No, it was answered. It was just the volume of ASB audits was something I was asking about, but it sounds like it's an annual, it's done annually.
Yes, that's correct. Ms. Hall, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm trying to shut up, but I just can't. Okay, so I was just going to say, if you could kind of review your process around the ASB audits and how that works so that she is more familiar.
Okay, so some of the items that we reviewed this year have been cash disbursements, cash receipts, charters and constitutions, make sure that they're on file. We've also looked at some student reimbursements due to when COVID, students submitted their payments for their grad night or prom, that they were reimbursed properly. We also looked at their, to see if they spent down correctly, the plans that you'll see later on. We've also looked at ensuring that expenditures have been pre-approved by and are recorded in their meeting minutes, and that have all, required signatures by EDCO, like student signature, principal signature, advisors, etc. So those are all the items that we look for. Those are some of the items that we look for when we review these their records. Because of our observations, there's been items that we've and that's what you see on these reports.
And if I may add, each internal audit report, not just for the ASBs, but they include an introduction as well as an objective and scope, which does describe the type of tests that are performed for each of the audits. So if we go to one of the ASB audits, for example, I'm not sure what page we're on. Okay, so Carolina, if you can go to page 2, which is right before this one. So right there's the objective and scope. And for example, as Gerardo described, close to the bottom, it states that audit tests were performed for cash disbursements, cash receipts, etc. So for these types of audits, our work is mostly focused on internal controls. So it involves control testing, which is just test of the processes and procedures that are carried out by the staff. So a lot of these were routine. There were a lot of common findings. Missing signatures is an example. So there was nothing extraordinary or significant. And as we scroll through some of these reports, we've included the action plans that were received from some of the sites. I'm not sure what page we're on, page 3. Let's see. So I think one of the first corrective action plans that we come in is on page 8. So this is an example of a corrective action plan due to the findings that were reported in the internal audit report. Again, we give the sites 30 days. We ask them to provide a corrective action to respond to the findings or the recommendations that are made. Were there any questions? Otherwise, we can move on to the next item, which is the fraud hotline update.
Wait, I would ask a couple of questions about these. And I know it was a pandemic year. And so in some cases, it was challenging for the teams at the school sites to really be able to do some of the things they were required to do. But in the cases of athletic charters, I think is how you refer to it, the clubs, the different clubs at the school site, are you finding this year that they are doing what they need to do up front? I mean, when you do an audit and you have all these findings and they have a work plan within the next year, because you got the response from Castle Park, for instance, July 29th. So this year, have you done any follow-up on these items to make sure that they are this year they're implementing it properly, the procedures and processes outlined, or do you just wait?
Yes.
Okay.
No, absolutely. Every audit includes a follow-up on prior audit year findings. So if we go back to the report that was issued to Castle Park High as an example, that would be on page 5. At the bottom, there's a section labeled follow-up on prior audit findings. And so this describes how we provide a status of the corrective actions that was provided by management in response to the prior audit report that was issued. And if you go to the next page, it lists what the finding was, as well as the recommendation, the corrective action that was provided by the site, and the status of that corrective action, whether they've implemented it or not.
Right. So, I mean, what I'm getting to is that you do follow up within the next year on the findings, and you're seeing whether or not they're implementing the necessary changes. So at this point in the year, are the schools that you have these responses from, do they seem to have followed the right road this year?
There are a lot of corrective actions that have been corrected, or the ASBs have implemented procedures and manners that resolves those issues or mitigates the risks that we've identified. But unfortunately, with new students and the turnover, there's just a lot of the same common findings that we may see.
It happens every year, I know, and the external audit has findings as well. And I'm just wondering how we can better support our ASBs and make sure that they understand, because a lot of it does happen with the clubs, right?
Yes, and we have provided a club advisor manual that was released, I believe, late last year. So advisors they should have received it at the beginning of this school year. And it's basically just a smaller version of the current ASB plan.
And those coaches, or is it the coaches of the clubs or the advisors?
The advisors,
I mean,
yeah.
The
Yep.
advisors are certificated staff members.
Correct.
And so, yeah, so they would have training also and be aware, but they may not always be interacting with some of the club people. I mean, how do we correct some of the issues if they are ongoing?
Right. So based on the responses that we've received from some of the school sites in regards to these observations, has been that they will have meetings with advisors prior to them to submitting their charter or an application. So that's what they state, that they'll ensure that that type of training will take place.
Okay. And I know there's a lot going on, and we are coming back from a pandemic, so everybody has a lot on their plate and are stretched pretty thin. I just hope that we can support the work and make sure that we provide the tools needed at all steps of the way, you know, whether it's at the initial part where they're getting the training and they're getting the manual, and if they need help, you know, that we're able to provide that so that when you do your work, we can ensure that they understand it is a formal process and it is necessary at all levels. And that's my hope, that we can do that. And I'm sure that moving forward, it'll get better. This has been a tremendous year already.
Yeah.
A lot going on this
Right.
year, and everybody's just,
Right.
yeah.
And I
sorry.
know that these audit reports that we've been completing these past couple of years, that gives the reason of the why more. So staff understand exactly like why it's important to document things or to have things recorded.
Right, to expand on that, rather than just noting the finding, we provide the condition or the weakness, basically describing what's wrong. And we provide them with a standard such as how things should be done. We also give them the risk or the impact of the problem, because we believe it helps for them to understand why it's a finding. We also try to provide them with what the cause is, along with our recommendations. So I think that, and the extensive revisions that we've done with the ASB procedures manual, as well as with the club advisor manual, has helped the ASBs with their training.
Thank you. I ultimately, it is about the students, and I really appreciate the fact that you're outlining everything for them and you're trying to give them all the reasoning behind it, because they need to understand it. Because really, there are, you know, I've heard and been involved, not personally involved, but I am knowledgeable about where things have gone wrong in an ASB situation, and staff has lost, has lost their job over it because of that. So I think it's important that we, and you're providing the support that they need, that we're giving them grace, especially this year when needed, and that we are reiterating the expectation that the operation is going to be followed as necessary and as outlined in the manuals and as required by law. So, because it's all for the students, and we don't want anybody getting in trouble for something that could be avoided, like loss of cash, for instance. Thank you. Is there any other questions on any of this? I did notice some of them had some significant amounts, and I hope that you were satisfied with the responses. But yeah, if you felt that anybody didn't have an adequate response, would you let us know that?
Yes, definitely.
How do you handle that?
With some of that, if we would have shared it with Dr. Salkett and Dr. Aguirre.
Right, and they would step in to support you in that effort, correct?
Yes, definitely. I mean,
and I really appreciate, appreciate that. So
Yeah.
the chain of command is working. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go on if no other questions are being asked.
Okay.
Okay, so the next item on the list is the fraud hotline update. So Carolina, this will come after page 91.
I think I missed the opportunity to ask a question.
I'm
Do
sorry.
we go over the spend down plans?
That will be coming up.
Okay, then I haven't missed it. Thank you.
Okay, so this is our fraud hotline quarterly report for the period that ended September 30th, 2021. And for the quarter, there were just 2 fraud hotline submissions. At the quarter end, there was one that was closed and there was one that was still open, and that's summarized on the second page. With our first submission, there were concerns regarding student athlete residency requirements and athletic eligibility, and that was unsubstantiated, so it was reviewed and closed by compliance. And our second case that is open is regarding students that, and this is just the reporter claims students are being required to take ESL classes and tests that interrupt their progress in other adult education classes. And the students are allegedly being encouraged to take the classes to increase enrollment at the adult school of a particular employee's class. So again, that's currently being reviewed by compliance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now we move on to, if there's no questions there, we move on to the spend down summaries. So this next report is a summary of the ASB's activity for the year that ended June 30th, 2021. And the way that it's presented is with the middle school or junior high schools in the top section, high schools in the middle, and then the adult alternative education schools at the bottom. And I'll walk you through one of these. So if we look at the upper left-hand corner, starting with the middle schools, the first site is Bonita Vista Middle. It's abbreviated as BVM. So we have their beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2020. We add in the year-to-date revenues, subtract the expenditures, and we arrive at the ending fund balance at June 30th, 2021. So with this particular site, for example, they started off with $43,378. We added their revenues of $9,333, subtracted expenditures of $14,419, and we arrive at their ending fund balance of $38,292. The next line would be their net activity, which is their revenues minus expenses. So for this site, they had a net loss of $5,086. And then we summarize a little bit of other information that we consider helpful, such as what their cash balance was at the end of the year. For this site, it was $51,707. There's other assets, and that may include account balances such as inventory. We also provide their total trust accounts, and those are funds held in trust by the ASB, such as funds raised by the clubs. And then there's total payables, and payables are amounts the ASBs owe to vendors. For example, at year end, it was common for ASBs to owe for yearbook invoices that remained unpaid. And then if we go down to the next line, those are the amounts that we calculated for ASBs to carry over into the subsequent year. For Bonita Vista Middle, that was $2,800, and they had an excess balance to spend down of $35,492. If we go to the, did you have any one?
Yeah, can you? I'm sort of missing out on how we figure out what the spend down will be. I didn't quite catch that or understand that. I know they're different for each school. Just kind of trying to understand that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. And I think if we go to the next page, that gives a little bit more detail. It doesn't give the exact calculation, so I'll just briefly go over how we determine that. So we use the ASB financial statements for the period that ended June 30th, 2021. We take their total revenues for the year and we multiply that by 30%. Now, 30% was an amount that was determined to be reasonable to provide the ASBs with amounts that they can carry over to be used to accomplish future goals. And so when we multiply their total revenues by 30%, we arrive at the amount that they can carry over into the next year. We take that carryover amount and we subtract it from their ending fund balance. And with that, we arrive with the excess balance, or the amount that they should be spending down. Again, looking at this summary, we have the middle schools presented at the top, the high schools in the middle, and the adult alternative education schools at the bottom. Using Bonita Vista Middle as an example, at the end of the last fiscal year, which was June 30th, 2020, they had total revenues of $75,668. So we multiplied that by 30%, and that's how we arrived at the $22,700. Their ending fund balance was $43,378. We subtracted the amount to carry over from that ending fund balance, and that's how we arrived at the $20,678. Each of the sites were asked to develop a spend down plan, and we'll provide an example. I think it's probably the next item, and we'll get to that in a minute, but there's a spend down request memo that is issued to each of the sites explaining what the carryover is, what the spend down is. We provide them with their spend down calculation. We ask them to submit a plan on how they'll use those funds. If we refer back to Bonita Vista Middle here, actually, they did not have an amount to spend down, so I'm sorry, yes, they did. Okay. So they had an amount to spend down of $20,678. So if we move down to the next line, it indicates whether they submitted a plan or not. Bonita Vista Middle did. And then we provide the amount that they spent during this last year that ended June 30th, 2021. For Bonita Vista Middle, they did not spend according to their spend down plan that was submitted. And that's why it shows that there is 0%. That's the percentage of actual expenses compared to their spend down plan. If we look at Eastlake Middle, just a few columns over, you can see that they spent about 54% of what they were asked to spend down of the $11,052. So it looks like most of the sites, unfortunately, did not spend according to their plans. And a lot of them stated that they were just unable to because of the site closures and just wanting to hold on to funds in the event that they were not able to raise enough during the year due to limited fundraising opportunities. So if we continue to go through the information presented on this schedule, in the gray area for Bonita Vista Middle, we now provide the carryover calculations for the year that just ended. So for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021, this site had total revenues of $333. We calculated their amount to carry over at $2,800. Their ending fund balance was $38,292. So their amount to spend down was calculated at $35,492. The next line indicates whether we have received a spend down plan for that site. We have received spend down plans for all the sites. There's a few that we're continuing to work with, and we should have another update at the next meeting.
Thank you. So in regards to the spend down plan, but if they, I understand that they, have limited fundraising opportunities because of COVID, but that's an option for them. It's just to say we don't want to spend it, and just go on from there, and then just carry that money over to the next year, which is what I have a problem with. Is because I would think if they're, especially if they're raising money, that money should be spent on this on the students that who raised that money on those activities, or who's ever raised the money. That's just my opinion.
Agreed. And this is actually why this is the third year that we've implemented these spend down plans, and it will likely to be something that's continued every year. But if we go to the next slide or the next item, this is an example spend down request that I can walk you through.
Can I ask a question first?
Sure.
I missed the amount they're allowed to carry over. Is it a percentage of what their balance is? How do you determine how much they're able to spend down?
If we can go to the next item, it actually includes an example calculation for one of the sites, and so that may be helpful.
Okay.
So if we can go through that next item. So this is an example spend down request that was issued to Bonita Vista High School. And the opening paragraphs describe what a carryover is, which is the amount of the money the ASB has at the end of the fiscal year, also referred to as their ending fund balance. It goes on to provide FCMAT guidance that states funds raised by students during a given school year are intended to be spent on behalf of those same students while they're at the same school. We describe how it may be reasonable to carry over balances to accomplish future goals, but otherwise large or excessive carryover balances without a plan of intended use is discouraged. And having a plan of intended use may be something such as saving for a large project that may take several years to save up for, such as replacing a marquee or replacing a scoreboard. We then go on to describe how the ending fund balance and the total revenues earned for each fiscal year is the basis of calculating the carryover amount for the next year. And that carryover amount is then subtracted from the ending fund balance, which will equal the amount that the ASB will need to spend down. If we go to the next page of this memo, we provide the steps to calculate the carryover and spend amounts. Again, we multiply total revenues and we multiply that by 30%, which will equal the carryover amount. And then we subtract the carryover amount from the ending fund balance. So using Bonita Vista High School's June financial statements, we provided them with how their spend down amount was calculated. We see here that their total revenues for the year was $76,829. Multiply that by 30%, their amount to carry over is $23,049. Since their ending fund balance was $61,938, we subtract what they can carry over and we arrive to what they have in excess, which is what they need to spend down. We asked them to use a spend down request form that was included with this memo to submit a plan. And we asked for any plans that included the planning and design of new construction that they submit their intention to Ms. Janaea Quirk using a facility modification request form. And for any plans that included the purchase of supplies or equipment for athletics, we asked for them to vet their intention through Dr. Vernon Moore, who's the Chief of Education, Equity, and Support Services, as well as Mr. Robert Hughes, the Chief Compliance Officer. And when we receive the spend down plans, we review them to evaluate whether the items that are included are appropriate ASB expenditures. We double check to see that the amount that they're spending is in line with what they're being asked to spend. There is follow-up if they're submitting a plan that doesn't include items for the total amount that they were asked to spend down. We asked why, or if there's items on there that may be a potential liability, we let them know that it would not be allowable. So after we review these and we determine they're good to go, they're then forwarded to Dr. Salkeld's office for her to review. The next item past this example spend down request are the actual spend down plans that we received that have been signed as approved by Dr. Salkeld.
I have a question first.
Sure.
A point of clarification. So every class, it's my understanding or my experience when my kids were in school that their class started fundraising when they were for their first year in the school. So if they were in 7th grade, they started 7th, 8th. But most of this is with high school. So 9th grade, they started saving up and doing fundraisers for what would eventually be their senior year activities. Is that still occurring, or is that, am I misunderstanding?
No, that still occurs.
So if a class has, is that part of that class balance, part of this total amount that they have to spend down? Because maybe some of those classes haven't had a chance to spend it because they're not even seniors yet. Do you understand what I'm asking? I mean,
I do. And there's actually two concepts when it comes to carryover and spend down. One is with the general fund and the other is with the trust or the club account balances. And what this spend down plan intends is for the ASB to spend down their general fund versus those club balances.
So, but a class is part of the general fund, isn't it? It's not a club.
Actually, it is
It's
considered
classified as a club?
it's classified as a trust account. So there are amounts held in
Okay,
trust
a
by the
trust,
ASB.
But different than a club.
Different than a club, but it is similar in the way that they raise the funds and how they spend those funds. But with the class accounts, we typically don't follow those or review them as closely because those classes usually like to save their money until they're seniors, unless there's something they have planned before then. But a lot of those funds are used to finance prom or grad night or T-shirts that they may want. Yeah. But I did describe there's two concepts, one again being the general fund and the other with the trust club account balances. So we do review those club balances at the end of the year, and our most recent revised manual included a new form for the carryover of club funds, because there is an expectation for them to spend those funds on the students that raise those funds in the same year. So same concept. And if they do not spend that money, we ask them why and to provide us with their carryover plan as well. But what we're reviewing today is just for the general fund.
But okay, so is there a method for them to allocate those funds to the next year if they don't spend it? Isn't that true, or is that not true?
Are we referring to the general fund or the club accounts?
The general fund, I would think. They would have to do a board item for their ASB, board or whatever it is to consider, but they would be able to do that through a formal action by the ASB. Isn't that true or not?
That's correct. So we did describe to them in the spend down memo, for example, that it may be reasonable to carry over funds if they'd like to save up for a future project. So it would be considered reasonable for them to carry over funds as long as they have a plan in place. Otherwise, they're discouraged from just saving money because that is not the intent of the law. They should be spending the money on the students who raise those funds. Those students should be benefiting from that. Right.
Right. And you're talking about a law that is covering things not during a pandemic, correct?
Yes.
Right. So there was no special consideration given this year due to the pandemic because the law probably never addressed it. There was never a special accommodation adopted in Sacramento, so there isn't one being adopted now for these students.
That is correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there was an exception that was allowed last year because of COVID, but we'd mentioned to them with the development of their plans this year that that same consideration would not be made because now the sites are fully reopened. And there really should be no reason to not spend those funds.
Okay.
And a lot of these sites, well, not a lot of them, all of them, they do submit a balanced budget with a plan to raise money during the year and to spend. So although they're being asked to spend down, they also have plans to fundraise more money. So it's just an ongoing cycle. We raise money, we spend money.
Okay. Mr. Segura, did you have another question or have you posed your question yet?
So I just had a question on, I was looking through the actual spend down plans, the ones that actually are written up. And I noticed on, whose was it? I think it was, where did I write it at? I think it was the First High School. And I don't know if it was just Benita Vista, maybe it was Benita Vista High School if they were the first one. It showed it because there was a question there on the forum. It said, was this voted on or something to that effect? And I couldn't tell if it, and there's like a yes and a no, and I couldn't tell. Maybe it was lost in the reproduction. if it was, I didn't see a yes or a no on it. I think it said it was in the, is that the high school? Is that the first high school? Unless I was looking at it incorrectly.
Oh, yes, that would be Bonita Vista High School. And yes, it does appear that it's not circled. So we will certainly follow up with the sites on that. We do spend, our next step in the process is to send them an approval memo, and it gives them further instructions on next steps, such as making sure that everything's approved and documented in the meeting minutes. There's instructions such as which items can be purchased following the ASB's regular cash disbursement procedures versus submitting a requisition through the district, and how they should record expenses related to their plans. So we'll make sure that they're aware of the next steps, including the proper approvals.
All right, great. Yeah, this is, I mean, there's a lot of work involved with this. I mean, a lot of work, and that's something else. I mean, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I know you already said, we get the same issues, year after year. But and you said the same thing that I was thinking, that because of the turnover, and that has a lot to do with it. But I know you're still addressing that to try to improve it. So I appreciate all the work, because there's a lot of work involved in this, and just as part of the of what you do. Thank you.
Yes, and this is why the first quarter, or the first few months of the year, is focused on ASBs, because of this work that needs to be completed.
So I have a question that kind of goes along the same with Mr. Segura's, and that was the Olympian High. I noticed they didn't have theirs circled either, and actually the signatures on two of the people are way above the line. So I'm wondering, are these actual original signatures? Are they electronically signing them? Are they using stamps to sign them? What is the process, and what did we require in this?
It looks like some of them are actual wet signatures. Some of them may be electronic signatures. And a lot of these sites have just adapted to the remote setting of using those electronic approvals. But we do receive these spend down plans from the administrators. So that kind of assures the integrity of the submissions.
Well, can we require that they have original signatures? It seems like that we should, now that we're back in person. I mean, this is student money, and we want to have people really looking at it and not having somebody else sign it off for them, is my way of thinking. That's why I'm asking this.
If that's the preference of the board as well as with fiscal services, we can definitely pass on that guidance.
Yeah, we also received copies of the meeting minutes as well, so we have that as backup support as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for going over the procedures. This is a lot of information. I noticed the first chart, just in noticing the balances in some of the schools, like some are really high, like Rancho Del Rey. And so thank you for going over like spend down plans, just seeing that amount of money. I'm hoping that it could be utilized by the students raising it. And also, I don't know if this is a question for here, but I'm assuming the ASBs are communicating kind of their budgets at the schools to the students.
Yes, so each ASB has a financial statement packet, and that includes a basic financial statement such as a balance sheet and a statement of revenues and expenses, otherwise known as an income statement. It also includes a budget report, and that budget report includes their budget actual expenses and any differences. And if we see any significant differences, we do follow up with the site. We review these on a monthly basis and we ask for additional information. Now that is, however, just for the general ASB. We don't monitor those club balances as closely until we get to the end of the year.
Well, it's encouraging to know there's balances in all these accounts. So once activities are resumed, it'll be nice to have that problem of spending it.
I think, and unfortunately, it's a different and uncomfortable idea for a lot of these ASBs to send money, because with our personal finances, for example, they want to save. So it's challenging for them to think, well, why do we need to spend this money? We want to save so we have as much as we can for any future obligations. But again, their budgets include a plan for fundraising, so there should always be that inflow and outflow.
Right, it's a balance of fundraising and spending for the kids.
Right. And I think with this being our third year of the spend down plans, a lot of them are starting to really understand the purpose and appreciating what these plans are intended to do, as well as getting used to the idea of spending those funds. So again, we'll provide another update at the next meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions on this? If not, you can go forward, Stephanie.
I think that's all we have this evening.
Okay.
So if there's no other questions, we thank you for your time.
Thank you. A lot of work, and we really appreciate all the efforts you do and the documentation you must be providing schools and our leadership. We appreciate it a lot. So the next item on our schedule is the unadopted minutes, correct?
We have one more before that, Trustee Hall's
Okay.
fundraisers and expenditure list.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So we're bringing this one forward to the committee. We did this a few months ago, so that way the committee would review it and it was presented to the Board of Trustees. So we've just got a few slight changes here that are highlighted. I think some are just more wording, like the online fundraising, that's what's stated there, the pending final contracts that was addressed previously. And then the donation. So this item here specifically, there was a resolution taken to the board that does allow for donations for outside agencies and the process that was set up for that. And so we just wanted to have the latest document, this particular document, along with the resolution. It's on the Internal Audits website for their department. And so we just wanted to have an opportunity to bring it here so it's as current as much as possible. And then we can bring it forward to the board at the next meeting. So that we can have that information posted. So it's really just those two slight changes, but as we've been keeping this committee apprised, we're bringing it forward. So I think Trustee Hall, then you would make that recommendation to the board at the next meeting.
Okay. Go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry about that. So food sales are resuming during the pandemic.
Food sales?
Yeah, I just saw that on the list.
I think we'd have to, I mean, these are general parameters. I think there's still some considerations as it relates to the pandemic and so forth.
Yeah, so maybe I can chime in with a little bit of context. So at this time, we're slowly kind of phasing in additional phases of reopening. So for example, we're just now moving to allowing events such as, which is the one, banquets. The guidance that we put out to our school sites is that they have to do that in an outside setting, so they can't do it inside. So we're slowly progressing kind of down that path of reopening based on the guidance we receive from multiple agencies. But this is really meant to be more of a catch-all kind of list. So when they are able to do this in a way that's safe, and hopefully we get this pandemic behind us. This was here before the pandemic, and it's meant to outlast. This is really a list of those. Before this list, there was a question about what's acceptable or appropriate and what's not. So then the board move forward to adopt a list of activities that are deemed acceptable.
Thank you.
And I had a question on the second page under donations, and you're striking out that sub bullet point underneath donations.
Yes, because we have the board resolution, and I'm not sure, Carolina, do we have that as attached on there? The board took
But-
an item.
I do not, but I'll be happy to pull it up for you.
Well, I think it needs to be more, it's not about accepting donations, it's about sending donated funds to some other entity, right? And I think that kind of needs the clarification in that wording. And then if you have a board item that was adopted, if you would reference the board item like you did, I think in another one, I think on the previous page. Wasn't there one? Yeah. Contracts must be consistent with resolution 2479. If there was a particular board item for donations, then if you would cite it on that, I think that would make it clearer. Provide clarification, because I think that's where it can get tricky, right? Those donations going out to something that wouldn't be inappropriate. And although we have all these layers, we just want to make sure it's clear.
Okay, so yeah, we can definitely reference this resolution 4732 that Carolina just pulled up.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
we'll make those modifications and then provide that for the board.
Okay, so we'll recommend that the board adopts this. Is that the consensus? I'm not hearing anybody saying no, so I would say yes. Recommendations to adopt. Okay, great. And the next item would be the adoption of our minutes. Did you have a chance to read through the minutes?
Yes, I move to approve.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right, that sounds great. We're all agreed, so I'm not gonna oppose it, that's for sure. I'll make a recommendation, or it'll be presented to the board by Dr. Sockgeld on our next agenda. Okay. The last item is about our charter. I don't know if you had a chance to review it. Are you all comfortable with it? I know I was asking to bring it back because it is in our bylaws to, I mean, the charter is actually our bylaws, basically. That we review them annually, I believe. Is that appropriate?
Yes, still looks good to me.
Okay. Accept what? You want to accept it?
Yes.
Okay, so no change. Lisa?
No, is there going to be another community member? I'm just curious.
Well, we'll put it back out there for application. We need to have another application period because the last one who was nominated, Mr. Beckett, he declined after we accepted him on the board it was accepted by the board, his nomination. He contacted us and declined the role. So we'll have to go back out and advertise for a new application period.
And I believe Trustee Hall, we do have that posted until filled. So I think it is on the district website. All
right, great. So we'll mention it at our district board meeting as well, that there's a vacancy to be filled. It's such a fun committee. I mean, I don't know why we don't have hundreds of applicants, but yeah, so if you're comfortable with it as is, we're just going to leave that on and we'll go to the last item, which is the board comments. Is that
Oh, no,
board
and
committees?
yeah, Trustee Hall, you had mentioned the last meeting about the bylaws. So we just provided under section or item 7 and 8, just the board bylaws. I don't know if you want to have any discussion, it's there as a reference.
Right. And I see that it says the superintendent or designee may serve as an advisor to any committee. Oh, well, that's probably any other committee.
Correct.
Right. But you're always here, so we appreciate your being here with us today and always. Dr. Gary, we appreciate your time. If there's no questions on this item, I don't think we have any changes to recommend. Okay, so we'll move on to the last item, and that's financial reports and accountability. Oh, that's another board policy that you provided us.
So it highlights the role of, again, maintaining fiscal stability or kind of maintain our budgets and so forth. But then there's a section that actually talks about the audit committee right there.
This one is this sentence though is confusing to me, that it says who will be appointed by members of the Audit Finance Subcommittee with final approval by the Board of Trustees. I think that's not really how we do it.
Which one is that, Trustee Hall?
Under the Audit Finance Subcommittee, it's in the first sentence after
in the paragraph. Okay, so it's in the paragraph.
Preferably governmental fiscal matters, who will be, it says it's referring to the 2 community members who will be appointed by the members of the Audit Finance Subcommittee. So I think that needs some work, because the Audit Finance Subcommittee doesn't really do the appointment of members. The 2 board members on the Audit Finance Subcommittee are the final people to look at those and make recommendations to the board. That's how I would envision it. That's how we originally did it. The very first time was the interview was taking place and there were only 2 board members on the committee at that time. And we interviewed all the applicants and then made a recommendation to accept. We accepted the final applicants and made those recommendations, and they went forward to the board to approve. I think it's how we did. Our approval was the approval for them to be on the committee at that time, because we didn't have a lot of really, hard line rules around it. So maybe we'll take a look at this and refine it a little bit.
Trustee Hall, might I suggest that perhaps we strike the language that talks about the Audit Finance Subcommittee and basically indicate that the final approval will be by the Board of Trustees. So that would kind of get to that issue, because the members of the subcommittee can definitely go through that process. But at the end of the day, the final approval is the board's jurisdiction. Right.
So the who will be appointed by the members of the Audit Finance Subcommittee with final approval by the Board of Trustees, and leave the rest of it there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we can make that recommendation. We'll give those updates to Ms. Facedo, and then we'll bring that forward at a future board meeting, since it'll be approved with the change by the board members.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think we do need to say that yes. The 2 community members will, because the other sentence talks about the board members being appointed at the December meeting, but that doesn't talk about the board member or the community members being approved, but you
Correct.
guys can work that out and bring it to the board.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the final comments, I think that's all we need to do, right, today? I'm done. I know you guys have probably, your 2 hours have been well spent. We really appreciate your time. Are there any comments from our members? I just want to make sure I have the right takeaways. We have a takeaway of a recommendation to adopt the ASB spending, or whatever that's called, that item. I passed it. I'm sorry. Fundraisers and expenditures. And then a recommendation for the item C8, which speaks to the committee, and we'll do, or the board committees. Make sure I'm on the right thing.
That's correct. It's C8.
Right.
For
C8.
the board policy.
Right. Amend the board policy and make those recommendations to the board. If you send me a copy of the draft recommendation you have before the board meeting, I can include it in my comments to the board. All right, is that agreed? All right. That's it. All right, it's 6 o'clock, you guys.
Right on
Well,
time.
Yay, thank you everybody for all your work.
Thank
Enjoy your
you so
evening.
much.
All right.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Take care.